Hello, everybody. My name is Mr. Steffler, and I'm here in room 111 at Clintondale Middle School, and I want to talk about the Chapter 13 test that's going to be happening tomorrow on Thursday, right before the end of the semester. I want to talk about some of the questions, and I want to talk about early American music, early American literature, and early American art. So let's start out with what's on the test. We have a question. The first question on the test has to do with where people lived in America. There's some facts in your chapter that talk about like the population distribution, where people live compared to things like the Mississippi River, the Appalachian Mountains, the Atlantic Ocean. So you have to know where people lived in the country. We also talked a lot in this chapter about nationalism, and we talked about different symbols that are symbols of nationalism. One of the symbols that came out of, like, let's say the War of 1812 was Uncle Sam and the United States government. Another one is out of the War of 1812 was the song, The Star-Spangled Banner. So those were two things that came out of the War of 1812. This question asks, the next question talks about the era of good feelings. I would study your notes on page 91, I think, talks about the era of good feelings, what it was, who was president during it. We've got a question about the American system. It talks about the main purpose of the American system. We have a question that talks about John Marshall and the Supreme Court. And it talks about what he didn't do. So you have to be very careful on question 5. Number 6 has to do with the basics of the chapter, the economics of the chapter. And then we get into the art, music, and literature portion. The two things that are mentioned most in the art section is, first of all, folk art, people making their own art on the farm, not people trained, not trained artists, not trained sculptors, people who are just making their own stuff. It's actually become very valuable these days to find some of that old folk art. Another thing that we have is we have the Hudson River School, and they were famous for making paintings of landscapes, waterfalls, mountains, things of that nature at the Hudson River School. So they were painting things in nature. And then it talks about John James Audubon, who had a love for birds, and he traveled around North America and detailed and drew as many birds as he could, and he still is famous today. He has a nonprofit group called the Audubon Society, and that helps preserve places where birds live. Also, we talked about early American music. Obviously, patriotic songs has always been popular. Formal dances like square dance and cotillions were popular at the time. Obviously, all music at the time was recorded or not recorded, live, all music. There was no records, there was no phonograph at the time. The black slaves often were making spirituals. Swing Low is an example of that, one of those. And we also had these minstrel songs there where white composers would kind of listen to what the African Americans were doing with the music and then basically take it and make it their own. Those minstrel shows were really, really popular. The next thing I want to talk about is early American literature. Some of my favorite artists or writers were writing during this time. Washington Irving wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which obviously is about the Headless Horseman and Ichabod Crane. We also learned about Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that wrote the poem Paul Revere's Ride. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, the 18th of April in 75. There's hardly a man who's now alive that remembers that famous day and year. So that is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's historical celebration of Paul Revere's Ride. And then I want to talk about James Fenimore Cooper. Now, I know that we're not done with Last of the Mohicans yet, but he didn't just write that. He also wrote The Pioneers. And both Last of the Mohicans and The Pioneers had something to do with the frontier and the wilderness and man versus nature and man versus the wilderness and America's expansion into this wilderness. So this is really your test review. These are the things that you should study on pages 90, 91, and 92 for the test that's coming tomorrow. It's right at the end of the marking period. I know that you have your collage assignment. That's going to be due on Friday. We're going to be putting that together tomorrow. So good luck with these things. I hope that I have at least 75 hits tonight so people are looking at this and studying, and hope that you do well tomorrow. So without any further add-ons, let's just say God bless America. Talk to you later.